Section 3 of Protagoras, by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Johnson. Well then, he said, I think that the myth will be more interesting. Once upon a time there were gods only, and no mortal creatures. But when the time came that these also should be created, the gods fashioned them out of earth and fire and various mixtures of both elements in the interior of the earth. And when they were about to bring them into the light of day, they ordered Prometheus and Epimetheus to equip them, and to distribute to them severally their proper qualities. Epimetheus said to Prometheus, Let me distribute, and do you inspect. This was agreed, and Epimetheus made the distribution. There were some to whom he gave strength without swiftness. Well, he equipped the weaker with swiftness. Some he armed, and others he left unarmed, and devised for the latter some other means of preservation, making some large, and having their size as a protection, and others small, whose nature was to fly in the air or burrow in the ground. This was to be their way of escape. Thus did he compensate them, with the view of preventing any race from becoming extinct. And when he had provided against their destruction by one another, he contrived also a means of protecting them against the seasons of heaven, clothing them with close hair and thick skins, sufficient to defend them against the winter cold and able to resist the summer heat, so that they might have a natural bed of their own when they wanted to rest. Also he furnished them with hooves and hair and hard and callous skins under their feet. Then he gave them varieties of food, herb of the soil to some, to others fruits of trees, and to others roots, and to some again he gave other animals as food. And some he made to have few young ones, while those who were their prey were very prolific. And in this manner the race was preserved. Thus did Epimetheus, who, not being very wise, forgot that he had distributed among the brute animals all the qualities which he had to give, and when he came to man, who was still unprovided, he was terribly perplexed. Now, while he was in this perplexity, Prometheus came to inspect the distribution, and he found that the other animals were suitably furnished, but that man alone was naked and shoeless, and had neither bed nor arms of defence. The appointed hour was approaching when man in his turn was to go forth into the light of day, and Prometheus, not knowing how he could devise his salvation, stole the mechanical arts of Hephaestus and Athene, and fire with them. They could neither have been acquired nor used without fire, and gave them to man. Thus man had the wisdom necessary to the support of life, but political wisdom he had not, for that was in the keeping of Zeus. And the power of Prometheus did not extend to entering into the citadel of heaven where Zeus dwelt, who, moreover, had terrible sentinels. But he did enter by stealth into the common workshop of Athene and Hephaestus, in which they used to practice their favourite arts, and carried off Hephaestus's art of working by fire, and also the art of Athene, and gave them to man. And in this way man was supplied with the means of life. But Prometheus is said to have been afterwards prosecuted for theft, owing to the blunder of Epimetheus. Now man, having a share of the divine attributes, was at first the only one of the animals who had any gods, because he alone was of their kindred, and he would raise altars and images of them. He was not long in inventing articulate speech and names, and he also constructed houses and clothes and shoes and beds, and drew sustenance from the earth. Thus provided, mankind at first lived dispersed, and there were no cities. But the consequence was that they were destroyed by the wild beasts, for they were utterly weak in comparison of them, and their art was only sufficient to provide them with the means of life. and did not enable them to carry on war against the animals. Food they had, but not as yet the art of government, of which the art of war is a part. After a while the desire of self-preservation gathered them into cities, but when they had gathered together, having no art of government, they evil entreated one another, and were again in process of dispersion and destruction. Zeus feared that the entire race would be exterminated, and so he sent Hermes to them, bearing reverence and justice to be the ordering principles of cities and the bonds of friendship and conciliation. Hermes asked Zeus how he should impart justice and reverence among men. Should he distribute them as the arts are distributed, that is to say, to a favoured few only, one skilled individual having enough of medicine or of any other art for many unskilled ones? Shall this be the manner in which I am to distribute justice and reverence among men, or shall I give them to all? To all, said Zeus. I should like them all to have a share, for cities cannot exist if a few only share in the virtues as in the arts. And further, make a law by my order, that he who has no part in reverence and justice shall be put to death, for he is a plague of the state. And this is the reason, Socrates, why the Athenians and mankind in general, when the question relates to carpentering or any other mechanical art, allow but a few to share in their deliberations, and when any one else interferes, then, as you say, they object, if he be not of the favoured few, which, as I reply, is very natural. But when they meet to deliberate about political virtue, which proceeds only by way of justice and wisdom, they are patient enough of any man who speaks of them, as is also natural, because they think that every man ought to share in this sort of virtue, and that states could not exist if this were otherwise. I have explained to you, Socrates, the reason of this phenomenon. And that you may not suppose yourself to be deceived in thinking that all men regard every man as having a share of justice or honesty and of every other political virtue, let me give you a further proof, which is this. In other cases, as you are aware, if a man says that he is a good flute player, or skilful in any other art in which he has no skill, people either laugh at him or are angry with him, and his relations think that he is mad, and go and admonish him. But when honesty is in question, or some other political virtue, even if they know that he is dishonest, yet, if the man comes publicly forward and tells the truth about his dishonesty, then, what in the other case was held by them to be good sense, they now deem to be madness. They say that all men ought to profess honesty, whether they are honest or not, and that a man is out of his mind who says anything else. Their notion is, that a man must have some degree of honesty, and that if he has none at all, he ought not to be in the world. I have been showing that they are right in admitting every man as a counsellor about this sort of virtue, as they are of opinion that every man is a partaker of it, and I will now endeavour to show further that they do not conceive this virtue to be given by nature, or to grow spontaneously, but to be a thing which may be taught, and which comes to a man by taking pains. No one would instruct, no one would rebuke, or be angry with those whose calamities they suppose to be due to nature or chance. They do not try to punish or to prevent them from being what they are, they do but pity them. Who is so foolish as to chastise or instruct the ugly, or the diminutive, or the feeble? And for this reason, because he knows that good and evil of this kind is the work of nature and of chance. Whereas, if a man is wanting in those good qualities which are attained by study and exercise and teaching, and has only the contrary evil qualities, other men are angry with him, and punish and reprove him. Of these evil qualities one is impiety, another injustice, and they may be described generally as the very opposite of political virtue. In such cases any man will be angry with another, and reprimand him, clearly because he thinks that by study and learning, the virtue in which the other is deficient may be acquired. If you will think, Socrates, of the nature of punishment, you will see at once that in the opinion of mankind virtue may be acquired. No one punishes the evildoer under the notion, or for the reason, that he has done wrong. Only the unreasonable fury of a beast acts in that manner. But he who desires to inflict rational punishment does not retaliate for a past wrong which cannot be undone. He has regard to the future, and is desirous that the man who is punished, and he who sees him punished, may be deterred from doing wrong again. He punishes for the sake of prevention, thereby clearly implying that virtue is capable of being taught. This is the notion of all who retaliate upon others either privately or publicly, and the Athenians too, your own citizens, like other men, punish and take vengeance on all whom they regard as evil doers, and hence we may infer them to be of the number of those who think that virtue may be acquired and taught. Thus far, Socrates, I have shown you clearly enough, if I am not mistaken, that your countrymen are right in admitting the tinker and the cobbler to advise about politics, and also that they deem virtue to be capable of being taught and acquired. There yet remains one difficulty which has been raised by you about the sons of good men. What is the reason why good men teach their sons the knowledge which is gained from teachers, and make them wise in that, but do nothing towards improving them in the virtues which distinguish themselves? And here, Socrates, I will leave the apologue and resume the argument. Please to consider, is there or is there not some one quality of which all the citizens must be partakers, if there is to be a city at all? In the answer to this question is contained the only solution of your difficulty. There is no other. For if there be any such quality, and this quality or unity is not the art of the carpenter or the smith or the potter, but justice and temperance and holiness and, in a word, manly virtue, if this is the quality of which all men must be partakers, and which is the very condition of their learning or doing anything else, and if he who is wanting in this, whether he be a child only or a grown-up man or woman, must be taught and punished, until by punishment he becomes better, and he who rebels against instruction and punishment is either exiled or condemned to death, under the idea that he is incurable. If what I am saying be true, good men have their sons taught other things and not this. Do consider how extraordinary their conduct would appear to be. For we have shown that they think virtue capable of being taught and cultivated both in private and public, and, notwithstanding, they have their sons taught lesser matters, ignorance of which does not involve the punishment of death, but greater things, of which the ignorance may cause death and exile to those who have no training or knowledge of them, ay, and confiscation as well as death, and in a word, may be the ruin of families. Those things, I say, they are supposed not to teach them, not to take the utmost care that they should learn. How improbable is this, Socrates! Education and admonition commence in the first years of childhood, and last to the very end of life. Mother and nurse and father and tutor are vying with one another about the improvement of the child as soon as ever he is able to understand what is being said to him. He cannot say or do anything without their setting forth to him that this is just and that is unjust, this is honourable, that is dishonourable, this is holy, that is unholy. Do this and abstain from that. And if he obeys, well and good. If not, he is straitened by threats and blows, like a piece of bent or warped wood. At a later stage they send him to teachers, and enjoin them to see to his manners even more than to his reading and music. And the teachers do as they are desired. And when the boy has learned his letters and is beginning to understand what is written, as before he understood only what was spoken, they put into his hands the works of great poets, which he reads sitting on a bench at school. In these are contained many admonitions, and many tales and praises and encomia of ancient famous men, which he is required to learn by heart, in order that he may imitate or emulate them and desire to become like them. Then again, the teachers of the lyre take similar care that their young disciple is temperate and gets into no mischief, and when they have taught him the use of the lyre, they introduce him to the poems of other excellent poets, who are the lyric poets, and these they set to music, and make their harmonies and rhythms quite familiar to the children's souls, in order that they may learn to be more gentle and harmonious and rhythmical, and so more fitted for speech and action. For the life of man in every part has need of harmony and rhythm. Then they send them to the master of gymnastic, in order that their bodies may better minister to the virtuous mind, and that they may not be compelled through bodily weakness to play the coward in war, or on any other occasion. This is what is done by those who have the means, and those who have the means are the rich. Their children begin to go to school soonest and leave off latest. When they have done with masters, the state again compels them to learn the laws, and live after the pattern which they furnish, and not after their own fancies. And just as in learning to write, the writing master first draws lines with a style for the use of the young beginner, and gives him the tablet and makes him follow the lines, so the city draws the laws, which were the invention of good lawgivers living in the olden time. These are given to the young man, in order to guide him in his conduct whether he is commanding or obeying, and he who transgresses them is to be corrected, or, in other words, called to account, which is a term used not only in your country, but also in many others, seeing that justice calls men to account. Now, when there is all this care about virtue, private and public, why, Socrates, do you still wonder and doubt whether virtue can be taught? Cease to wonder, for the opposite would be far more surprising. But why then do the sons of good fathers often turn out ill? There is nothing very wonderful in this, for, as I have been saying, the existence of a state implies that virtue is not any man's private possession. If so, and nothing can be truer, then I will further ask you to imagine, as an illustration, some other pursuit or branch of knowledge which may be assumed equally to be the condition of the existence of a state. Suppose that there could be no state unless we were all flute players. As far as each had the capacity and everybody was freely teaching everybody the art, both in private and public, and reproving the bad player as freely and openly as every man now teaches justice and the laws, not concealing them as he would conceal the other arts, but imparting them, for all of us have a mutual interest in the justice and virtue of one another, and this is the reason why every one is so ready to teach justice and the laws. Suppose, I say, that there were the same readiness and liberality among us in teaching one another flute playing. Do you imagine, Socrates, that the sons of good flute players would be more likely to be good than the sons of bad ones? I think not. Would not their sons grow up to be distinguished or undistinguished, according to their own natural capacities as flute players? And the son of a good player would often turn out to be a bad one, and the son of a bad player to be a good one. All flute players would be good enough in comparison of those who were ignorant and unacquainted with the art of flute playing. In like manner, I would have you consider that he who appears to you to be the worst of those who have been brought up in laws and humanities, would appear to be a just man and a master of justice if he were to be compared with men who had no education, or courts of justice, or laws, or any restraints upon them which compelled them to practice virtue; with the savages, for example, whom the poet Phaerocrates exhibited on the stage at the last year's Lenaean festival. If you were living among men such as the man haters in his chorus, you would be only too glad to meet with Eurybates and Phrenondus, and you would sorrowfully long to revisit the rascality of this part of the world. You, Socrates, are discontented. And why? Because all men are teachers of virtue, each one according to his ability. And you say, where are the teachers? You might as well ask, who teaches Greek? For of that too there will not be any teachers found. Or you might ask, who is to teach the sons of our artisans this same art which they have learned of their fathers? He and his fellow workmen have taught them to the best of their ability, but who will carry them further in their arts? And you would certainly have a difficulty, Socrates, in finding a teacher of them, but there would be no difficulty in finding a teacher of those who are wholly ignorant. And this is true of virtue or of anything else. If a man is better able than we are to promote virtue ever so little, we must be content with the result. A teacher of this sort I believe myself to be, and above all other men to have the knowledge which makes a man noble and good. And I give my pupils their money's worth, and even more, as they themselves confess. And therefore I have introduced the following mode of payment. When a man has been my pupil, if he likes he pays my price, but there is no compulsion, and if he does not like, he has only to go into a temple, and take an oath of the value of the instructions, and he pays no more than he declares to be their value. Such is my apologue, Socrates, and such is the argument by which I endeavour to show that virtue may be taught, and that this is the opinion of the Athenians. And I have also attempted to show that you are not to wonder at good fathers having bad sons, or at good sons having bad fathers, of which the sons of Polycleitus afford an example, who are the companions of our friends here, Paralus and Xanthippus, but are nothing in comparison with their father, and this is true of the sons of many other artists. As yet I ought not to say the same of Paralus and Xanthippus themselves, for they are young, and there is still hope of them. Protagoras ended, and in my ear so charming left his voice, that I the while thought him still speaking, still stood fixed to hear. Borrowed by Milton, Paradise Lost. At length, when the truth dawned upon me that he had really finished, not without difficulty, I began to collect myself, and looking at Hippocrates, I said to him, O son of Apollodorus, how deeply grateful I am to you for having brought me hither. I would not have missed the speech of Protagoras for a great deal, for I used to imagine that no human care could make men good, but I know better now. Yet I have still one very small difficulty, which I am sure that Protagoras will easily explain, as he has already explained so much. If a man were to go and consult Pericles or any of our great speakers about these matters, he might perhaps hear as fine a discourse, but then when one has a question to ask of any of them, like books, they can neither answer nor ask, and if any one challenges the least particular of their speech, they go ringing on in a long harangue, like brazen pots, which when they are struck continue to sound unless some one puts his hand upon them. Whereas our friend Protagoras can not only make a good speech, as he has already shown, but when he is asked a question he can answer briefly, and when he asks he will wait and hear the answer, and this is a very rare gift. Now I, Protagoras, want to ask of you a little question, which if you will only answer, I shall be quite satisfied. You were saying that virtue can be taught. That I will take upon your authority, and there is no one to whom I am more ready to trust. But I marvel at one thing about which I should like to have my mind set at rest. You were speaking of Zeus sending justice and reverence to men, and several times while you were speaking, justice and temperance and holiness and all these qualities were described by you as if together they made up virtue. Now I want you to tell me truly whether virtue is one whole, of which justice and temperance and holiness are parts, or whether all these are only the names of one and the same thing? That is the doubt which still lingers in my mind. There is no difficulty, Socrates, in answering that the qualities of which you are speaking are the parts of virtue which is one. And are they parts, I said, in the same sense in which mouth, nose, and eyes, and ears are the parts of a face? Or are they like the parts of gold, which differ from the whole and from one another only in being larger or smaller? I should say that they differed, Socrates, in the first way. They are related to one another, as the parts of a face are related to the whole face. And do men have some one part and some another part of virtue? Or if a man has one part, must he also have all the others? By no means, he said, for many a man is brave and not just, or just and not wise. You would not deny, then, that courage and wisdom are also parts of virtue? Most undoubtedly they are, he answered, and wisdom is the noblest of the parts. And they are all different from one another, I said. Yes. And has each of them a distinct function, like the parts of the face? The eye, for example, is not like the ear, and has not the same functions, and the other parts are none of them like one another, either in their functions or in any other way. I want to know whether the comparison holds concerning the parts of virtue. Do they also differ from one another in themselves and in their functions? For that is clearly what the simile would imply. Yes, Socrates, you are right in supposing that they differ. Then, I said, no other part of virtue is like knowledge, or like justice, or like courage, or like temperance, or like holiness? No, he answered. Well then, I said, suppose that you and I inquire into their natures, and first you would agree with me that justice is of the nature of a thing, would you not? That is my opinion. Would it not be yours also? Mine also, he said. And suppose that some one were to ask us, saying, O Protagoras, and you, Socrates, what about this thing which you were calling justice? Is it just or unjust? And I were to answer, just. Would you vote with me or against me? With you, he said. Thereupon I should answer to him who asked me, that justice is of the nature of the just. Would not you? Yes, he said. And suppose that he went on to say, well now, is there also such a thing as holiness? We should answer yes, if I am not mistaken. Yes, he said. Which you would also acknowledge to be a thing, should we not say so? He assented. And is this a sort of thing which is of the nature of the holy or of the nature of the unholy? I should be angry at his putting such a question, and should say, Peace, man, nothing can be holy if holiness is not holy. What would you say? Would you not answer in the same way? Certainly, he said. And then after this, suppose that he came and asked us, what were you saying just now? Perhaps I may not have heard you rightly, but you seemed to me to be saying that the parts of virtue were not the same as one another. I should reply, you certainly heard that said, but not, as you imagine, by me, for I only asked the question. Protagoras gave the answer. And suppose that he turned to you and said, is this true, Protagoras? And do you maintain that one part of virtue is unlike another? And is this your position? How would you answer him? I could not help acknowledging the truth of what he said, Socrates. Well then, Protagoras, we will assume this, and now supposing that he proceeded to say further, then holiness is not of the nature of justice, nor justice of the nature of holiness, but of the nature of unholiness, and holiness is of the nature of the not just, and therefore of the unjust, and the unjust is the unholy. How shall we answer him? I should certainly answer him on my own behalf that justice is holy, and that holiness is just. And I would say in like manner on your behalf also, if you would allow me, that justice is either the same with holiness, or very nearly the same. And above all, I would assert that justice is like holiness, and holiness is like justice. And I wish that you would tell me whether I may be permitted to give this answer on your behalf, and whether you would agree with me. He replied, I cannot simply agree, Socrates, to the proposition that justice is holy and that holiness is just, for there appears to me to be a difference between them. But what matter, if you please, I please, and let us assume, if you will, that justice is holy and that holiness is just. Pardon me, I replied, I do not want this, if you wish or if you will, sort of conclusion to be proven, but I want you and me to be proven. I mean to say that the conclusion will be best proven if there be no if. Well, he said, I admit that justice bears a resemblance to holiness, for there is always some point of view in which everything is like every other thing. White is in a certain way like black, and hard is like soft, and the most extreme opposites have some qualities in common. Even the parts of the face which, as we were saying before, are distinct and have different functions, are still in a certain point of view similar, and one of them is like another of them. And you may prove that they are like one another on the same principle that all things are like one another, and yet things which are like in some particular ought not to be called alike, nor things which are unlike in some particular, however slight, unlike. And do you think, I said in a tone of surprise, that justice and holiness have but a small degree of likeness? Certainly not, any more than I agree with what I understand to be your view. Well, I said, as you appear to have a difficulty about this, let us take another of the examples which you mentioned instead. Do you admit the existence of folly? I do. And is not wisdom the very opposite of folly? That is true, he said. And when men act rightly and advantageously, they seem to you to be temperate. Yes, he said. And temperance makes them temperate. Certainly. And they who do not act rightly act foolishly, and in acting thus are not temperate. I agree, he said. Then to act foolishly is the opposite of acting temperately. He assented. And foolish actions are done by folly, and temperate actions by temperance. He agreed. And that is done strongly which is done by strength, and that which is weakly done by weakness. He assented. And that which is done with swiftness is done swiftly, and that which is done with slowness, slowly. He assented again. And that which is done in the same manner is done by the same, and that which is done in an opposite manner by the opposite. He agreed. Once more I said, is there anything beautiful? Yes. To which the only opposite is the ugly? There is no other. And is there anything good? There is. To which the only opposite is the evil? There is no other. And there is the acute in sound? True. To which the only opposite is the grave? There is no other, he said, but that. Then every opposite has one opposite only, and no more? He assented. Then now, I said, let us recapitulate our admissions. First of all, we admitted that everything has one opposite and not more than one. We did so. And we admitted also that what was done in opposite ways was done by opposites. Yes. And that which was done foolishly, as we further admitted, was done in the opposite way to that which was done temperately. Yes. And that which was done temperately was done by temperance, and that which was done foolishly by folly. He agreed. And that which is done in opposite ways is done by opposites. Yes. And one thing is done by temperance, and quite another thing by folly. Yes. And in opposite ways? Certainly. And therefore by opposites, then folly is the opposite of temperance? Clearly. And do you remember that folly has already been acknowledged by us to be the opposite of wisdom? He assented. And we said that everything has only one opposite? Yes. Then, Protagoras, which of the two assertions shall we renounce? One says that everything has but one opposite, the other that wisdom is distinct from temperance, and that both of them are parts of virtue, and that they are not only distinct but dissimilar, both in themselves and in their functions, like the parts of a face. Which of these two assertions shall we renounce? For both of them together are certainly not in harmony; they do not accord or agree. For how can they be said to agree if everything is assumed to have only one opposite, and not more than one? And yet folly, which is one, has clearly the two opposites, wisdom and temperance. Is not that true, Protagoras? What else would you say? He assented, but with great reluctance. Then temperance and wisdom are the same, as before justice and holiness appeared to us to be nearly the same. And now, Protagoras, I said, we must finish the enquiry, and not faint. Do you think that an unjust man can be temperate in his injustice? I should be ashamed, Socrates, he said, to acknowledge this, which nevertheless many may be found to assert. And shall I argue with them or with you? I replied. I would rather, he said, that you should argue with the many first, if you will. Whichever you please, if you will only answer me and say whether you are of their opinion or not. My object is to test the validity of the argument, and yet the result may be that I who ask, and you who answer, may both be put on our trial. Protagoras at first made a show of refusing, as he said that the argument was not encouraging. At length he consented to answer. End of Part 3. Recording by Kevin Johnson.